What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. And in this video, I'm going to go over the overall roster for the New York Giants and kind of grade it going into the draft. Haven't had a ton of Giants content up the last couple of days because, quite frankly, there's not a lot to talk about. Right now, it's all speculation, talking about what the New York Giants are going to do in the draft, and I can't wait to see what they actually do. But right now, if we're being honest, it's a guessing game, and tonight we're going to guess. Bad Dog's going to be on the channel for Talking Giants, and to my knowledge, I think it's going to be the first time that we do a mock draft together, so I'm really looking forward to doing that. I'm also going to be live the 1 or 2 days leading up into the draft with the midday streams. I absolutely love doing that, but I'm kind of waiting until some of these rumors actually gain traction. I think a day or two before the draft is where it really starts to get exciting, and you start to get real information that may be leaked in terms of what may affect the New York Giants with the 11th overall pick and where they may be leaning. You're hearing it from all ends right now. You're hearing that the New York Giants may go edge. They may trade down to take an edge. They may go with an offensive lineman. They may go with a wide receiver. We don't know. Maybe they go with Micah Parsons. We will not know until the night of the draft, and right now it's a guessing game. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to tell you I have inside sources. And my head is spinning just like everybody else's, and that's the way it should be. And I think the New York Giants have done a pretty good job in terms of keeping everybody guessing, including myself. But in this video, I kind of wanted to go over the roster. I haven't really done that so much after free agency, and really talk about how it may affect this year's draft. Now, before I get started, I think we all need to realize as fans that when you draft, it's not just for this year. Now, of course, when I talk about the roster, it's going to be from a 2021 perspective. But as the draft goes along, 3rd, 4th, 6th round area, the New York Giants aren't just thinking about 2021. They're also thinking about 2023, 2024, players that they can mold into starters down the line. When you're in the 4th or 5th round, you're thinking more along the lines of depth. For their first year, at least, there's a reason they're dropping that far, and they could really go at any position. Like, as a fan, you may view the safety spot as a huge strength for this team, as it is, but that doesn't mean that they won't elect to draft a safety if they're in love with one and don't view, maybe Jabril Peppers is a long-term answer. Maybe they won't re-sign him. Logan Ryan, of course, is up there, and age isn't going to be here forever. So I think you need to factor that in as fans. I'm not going to rule out any position in this draft as it wears along. I think the needs is, kind of meets value in the first 2 or 3 rounds for the Giants, but after that, it's a guessing game. I think it's more so who they have on their board as the best player available. But I wanted to get started. First, I want to talk about all the free agents that we brought in and kind of talk about the needs that they've fulfilled. We brought in Golladay, of course, at the wide receiver spot. Adoree Jackson to be the cornerback 2. Ryan Anderson as a situational pass rusher. Mike Glennon, the backup quarterback. Devontae Downs we brought back. Zach Fulton to provide as a depth offensive lineman along with Jonathan Harrison. Kyle Rudolph, of course, to be the tight end 2 and a blocking specialist, somebody that could help in the red zone. Leonard Williams we brought back. Reggie Ragland as a situational middle linebacker. Ifeadi Odenigbo, a guy that you could kind of move around on that defensive line. John Ross, of course, is the number 3 or 4 wide receiver. Devontae Booker is the primary backup. Austin Johnson and CJ Board for special teams. But I wanted to start at the quarterback position for the New York Giants, and we'll kind of go from there in terms of grading and talking about it and whether or not I think the New York Giants should attack these positions in the draft. Giants, of course, brought in a backup. We'll start there. I thought Mike Glennon was an upgrade over Colt McCoy last year. Colt did a hell of a job. He stepped in. He got a win against Seattle, even though it didn't have a ton to do with him, but he didn't turn the ball over. I think he might have turned it over once, but that was on the defense and the running game. We all know that. I think Glennon is an upgrade. Over the last couple of years, he's at least been a solid quarterback, and I think he's a guy that could step in if Jones goes down, God forbid, and hopefully win us a couple of football games. And that ultimately is what a backup quarterback is for. Now, the Giants in prior years, at least the last 2, maybe even the last 3, have elected to go with 3 quarterbacks on the roster. And that's kind of split in terms of the teams in the NFL. Half the teams usually go with 2, half usually go with 3. They may get an undrafted guy. Who knows? Maybe there's already somebody on the roster that will make the team at that quarterback 3 spot. But I think that's the clear 1 and 2. In terms of drafting a quarterback, you've heard chatter from ESPN, guys like Max Kellerman saying that they would trade up for Trey Lance. That's not going to happen. It's stupid to even talk about. The New York Giants clearly have faith in Daniel Jones. They picked him with the 6th overall pick. Let's not act like he hasn't shown any promise. The guy probably would have 30 touchdowns in his rookie year. I know he had fumbling problems had he played all 16 games. The fumbling problems got better. They're not great yet, but they definitely got better in his second year, and we'll see if he continues to progress there. We know he needs more touchdowns, and we know that there were limitations last year due to Barkley going down, due to the new scheme, due to the lack of weaponry at the wide receiver position, and the fact that the New York Giants, I think, had the 5th or 6th most drops, yet the Giants only had the 27th most passing attempts. That's fully on the wide receivers. That's something that needs to improve, not to mention Jones has been sacked 83 times in just 26 starts, some of which goes on Jones, some of which goes on the offensive line. There's a lot that needs to be improved with this offense overall. Not all of it is on Daniel Jones, but certainly some of it is. But he's going to be your quarterback. The only way I could see the Giants drafting a quarterback would be to be what they view a long-term backup for this team going forward, and I don't see it happening. We only have 6 picks. If the Giants were to trade down and get 2 extra picks, maybe, but even then, I would probably elect to fill in other holes on this roster. I think this year is about Jones. I think you need to give him the opportunity. I think you need to give him everything you feel like he needs to be successful in his 3rd year. It's a big year for Jones. As a quarterback group as a whole, I'd probably give it a C, maybe a C+. Jones needs to show improvement before he gets into that B+ area. I think we have a solid backup. I'd probably give it a C. And I think with the improved team around him by year's end, I am predicting that this quarterback group will be no worse than a C+, trending towards a B- or possibly even a B. I do think Jones will have a pretty strong season in his 2nd year of the Garrett offense with Saquon Barkley, but a lot will come down to the offensive line. But I don't see the New York Giants drafting have anything there, even though I do view it as a C position at this point in time. That's now going to take me to the running back spot. And last year, of course, the New York Giants filled in a lot of holes with veterans. Wayne Gallman did a good job stepping in. He now has signed with the San Francisco 49ers. A lot of Giants fans are going to be upset about that. He did a good job behind a strong run blocking scheme of the New York Giants last year. Not good in pass protection. We're going to get to that in a second. And of course, they brought in guys like Alfred Morris, Devontae Freeman, who kind of manned the fort, got the job done, got the Giants by throughout the year. Saquon Barkley is back. We have to wait and see if he's fully back and 100%. He's still rehabbing from the injury last year, which is why I think the Giants went out there and signed Devontae Booker. Booker, I think, in the league has proven to be a solid 3-down running back, a guy that's capable of being a solid blocker, a tough runner in between the tackles, a good pass catcher. He's got decent speed. I think he could be a guy that even has a 50-50 distribution with Barkley early in the year before he gets fully established. So I think it was a good signing. Maybe you argue with the dollars and cents, but just in terms of a skill standpoint, I think Devontae Booker is more than suitable to be a strong backup for Saquon Barkley. Now, I've talked about it many times. I do think this unit needs more depth to it, and I do think the New York Giants may very well look to do that in this year's draft, whether it be in the 4th or 6th round area with one of those 2 6th-round picks. They could use a burner. Maybe they could use a really big runner in between the tackles, a different element at that position. But I would not be against the New York Giants drafting a running back in this year's draft. I do view it as one of the bigger needs on this team in terms of depth at the running back position. Am I going to be upset if they don't draft the running back? No. I could easily see them signing one via, as an undrafted free agent to provide as that 3rd running back. But yeah, that is something that I'm looking at as a Giants fan going into the draft. As an overall unit, if Barkley's healthy, I can't give it any worse than a B. I mean, Barkley to me is one of the 2 or 3 most talented running backs in the sport when he's healthy. We need to see him back, and we need to see this offensive line take that next step forward. He struggled last year in the one game that he played against the Steelers, but of course we couldn't block to save our lives. He was getting crushed in the backfield. The second game, people forget, he was starting to turn the corner. He had 29 yards on just 4 carries before going down with the injury. I think Barkley will be just fine. I view this group as no worse than a B with the potential to be an A if Barkley is 100% and the offensive line gets the job done. But the offense, make no mistake about it, will still revolve around Barkley. The wide receiver group, obviously upgraded, right? We signed Ross, we signed Golladay. We lost Golden Tate. I think we could all agree that Golladay, especially for this offense, is a major upgrade over Golden Tate, who barely eclipsed 300 yards last year. Golladay is just a year removed from leading the league in touchdowns, I think with 12 in one season, and he averaged almost 19 yards a carry, and definitely provides a guy that could stretch the field and a big-time red zone target for Daniel Jones, something that he did not have last year at the wide receiver spot. I think he's a bona fide number 1. Then you have Sterling Shepard. You could say maybe he's the slot. Either way, I think he's the 2nd most credible wide receiver in this offense. Darius Slayton would probably be the 3rd lined up on the outside opposite Golladay. As of now, we could definitely elect to take a wide receiver in the 1st or 2nd round of this year's draft. Slayton regressed last year. There's no denying it. The drops were there. He was among, I think, one of the top 10 or 15 in drops in the sport even though he didn't have a ton of targets. So that's something that if he is going to start next year, definitely needs to improve. The one thing I'll say for Slayton this year, you have to figure he's going to be getting the second or even third best coverage man on the opposite side with the additions we made at this wide receiver spot if he's in the starting lineup. In terms of depth, I actually like our depth. I think John Ross is definitely a capable number 4, may even be our number 3 if we stick with this group. Dante Pettis, I thought, did a pretty solid job for the Giants when given the opportunity, and CJ Board is a valuable special teams contributor. As an overall unit, I'd probably give it a C+, maybe a B-, possibly even a B. The biggest concern with this unit for me is the health. If they remain healthy, I'd probably say it's no worse than a B- group. Obviously, Shepard's had concussion problems. Galladay has missed time as of late. Ross has had injury problems throughout his career. But when healthy, I think it's an above-average wide receiver group. Could they use more punch here? Yes, not just for next year, but for the future. You don't know how much longer Shepard's going to be here. You don't know if Slayton is definitely going to be a starting caliber wide receiver in this league, even though I may argue, I think with the improved weaponry, he could be, but you don't know that. That's not conclusive. And Shepard could very well retire after this year. He's a concussion away from potentially contemplating retirement. We remember that 2 years ago. Plus, the Giants could elect to cut him. They'd save money on next year's cap where they're really going to be strapped. So would I be shocked if the Giants draft a wide receiver in the first round of this year's draft? No. And if you do that and you get a guy like Devontae Smith, it kind of upgrades this unit, maybe even to the strongest unit on this team, to at a bare minimum an A-. If you get a guy like Jalen Waddle or Devontae Smith, probably even an A, and would give no excuses in terms of weapons for Daniel Jones. So yes, I could see the Giants electing to go early in this year's draft at that position, if for no other reason for the future, not even just so much for this year with guys like Shepard and having unknowns with guys like Darius Slayton and the injury concerns. The offensive line, we're going to break it down by the tackles, the guards, and the centers. As an overall unit last year, if you just look at the totality of the season, we struggled mightily. We were 31st in the league. We surrendered the second most sacks. I mean, that's horrible. Some of that goes on Jones. Some of that goes on the line. The first half of the season, when we had Colombo as the offensive line coach, it was hard. That's why we ended up firing him. Joe Judge stepped in. You started to see the offensive line improve. We had hiccups along the way as we started going up against better defenses, but overall, it was a much better unit, which is why the New York Giants started to win games towards the second half of the year. It's why you started to see the ground attack get going. The pass protection still left a lot to be desired, but I thought Andrew Thomas took a big step forward over those last 8 games of the season. He also went up against some of the best edge rushers the league has to offer. I'm not too worried about Thomas. Am I telling you he's going to be all-pro? No. Could he be? Absolutely. He has that potential. I mean, the guy didn't surrender a hit his whole year, junior year at Georgia, and he definitely has the potential with proper coaching and growing as a lineman. But I think at a bare minimum, he should be an average left tackle in the NFL this year. I definitely expect him to take that big step forward. So I'm not really worried about him. Nate Solder, I would prefer him to be the swing tackle. I think that's what he will be, and I think he's more than adequate at that spot. I actually think he's an above-average swing tackle. I would probably even say that's an improvement over Cam Fleming. I know as Giants fans, we don't really like Nate Solder due to his contract and due to the fact that he underperformed. Of course, he had the thing with his child at home, but he's an experienced lineman. He's a guy that brings leadership, and I think as a swing tackle, he's good. As a starter, I'd have my doubts on the right side, a position that he has not played in the NFL since his rookie year. But I definitely think he's more than adequate as a swing tackle. As of now, I'd probably view Parrott as the favorite to start. Now, again, much like the wide receiver position, they may go with a guy like Rashawn Slater if he's there, and that completely changes everything. Parrott showed glimpses last year. He also showed signs of not being good at all. Out of UConn, he got destroyed against the Arizona Cardinals, but there's definitely potential there for Matt Parrott on the right side if he does get the nod. Right now, this unit, I'd probably view it as a C-. I mean, there's definitely still question marks with Thomas, even though I think he's going to be fine. Parrott, there's obviously question marks, and the same can be said for Solder. I think it has the ability to be even as high as a B+. Like if Thomas reaches, as high as we think he could, and Parrott takes that step forward, when you have young talent going into their second years, it's a huge potential for a huge, rise in production. Also, they could very much drop off. Sorry about the green screen right there. So it's kind of a question mark. I wouldn't view it as a strength yet, but it could very well be trending in the right direction. The interior offensive line is something that I personally worry very much about. After losing Kevin Zeitler, and again, we have young players there that maybe take a huge step forward. We did add a new offensive line coach in addition to Pat Flaherty, the former offensive line coach for the New York Giants when we were doing very well. and maybe that'll help us there. But when you look at the interior offensive line, Nick Gates, to me, probably slightly overrated by Giants fans. I love him. One of my favorite players on the team. I think he's maybe an average center at this point in time that maybe could continue to grow. And I think he's a very valuable member of this offensive line. His best position is probably guard, and I think he improved at the center spot as the year wore along, and I'm somewhat comfortable with him at that spot going into year 2, but by no means do I think it's like a lock that he's going to be a great center. I do like him, though, for his versatility, and I think he's the toughest guy and maybe even the leader of this offensive line. Shane Lemieux, obviously major question marks, was very good in run blocking, or I should say good in run blocking. Horrid in pass protection. I think he surrendered 5 sacks in about a half season's worth of starts, which is horrible for an interior offensive lineman. But maybe in year 2 he grows with proper coaching, you see improvement. And if the Giants don't elect to go with an early offensive lineman, I could only assume that's how they feel about him. Will Hernandez, Giants didn't show a lot of confidence in him. The one thing I'll say about Hernandez, he definitely was showing improvement as the year was starting to wear along before he got COVID. Then when he went down with COVID, didn't really get back in the starting lineup. Maybe some of that had to do with the fact that he was still sick. They didn't feel like he was 100%. Or maybe he's falling out of favor with this coaching staff. This year we'll answer a lot of questions. We'll see what kind of shape he comes into at training camp. And then they brought in 2 veteran depth pieces that could play on the interior offensive line. One being Jonathan Harrison, who didn't play last year, did start, I think, for the Jets the year before. Had a PFF grade in the low 50s each of the last 2 seasons in which he's played. And Zach Fulton, who I think gave up the most sacks in football for an interior offensive lineman last year. He was a solid guard the 2 prior years and is definitely a solid depth piece on the offensive line, but you probably don't want him starting. As an overall unit, maybe a D+ for the interior offensive line. I think it's a major question mark. Does it have upside of a C+, maybe even B- territory if guys like Lemieux and Hernandez take a major step up? Yes. But I think you're asking for a lot. I do think that's something the New York Giants should focus on early in this year's draft. Maybe not in the first, but if not the first, I personally would prefer no later than the second, if obviously you want to go with a guy like Micah Parsons or Devontae Smith in that first-round area. Next up is the tight end spot. And I see a lot of New York Giants fans, rightfully so, they're not huge fans of Evan Ingram, talking about the fact that they want to move on at the tight end spot, right? Because Evan Ingram, had all the drops. They blame him for a lot of the problems, as they should. Evan Ingram was not great for this New York Giants football team last year. I completely get it. Definitely didn't deserve that Pro Bowl nod, but he's our starter. In terms of the depth, we brought in Kyle Rudolph, who's obviously going to play a ton. We signed him to, I think, a $6 million per year contract, 2 years, $12 million. Will help in the red zone. Hopefully, regains full health. I think he will. I don't think the Giants would have signed him if they didn't feel that way. Provides good blocking. And then you got guys like Levine Toilo and even Caden Smith, who actually is pretty solid for the Giants in his rookie season. As an overall group, I don't see a reason to draft a tight end unless, of course, we trade Evan Ingram, which 6 days before the draft, I probably don't expect that to happen. So this group as a whole, I don't think we're going to draft a tight end, nor do I think we should. I know Evan Ingram's not a long-term answer. I know Kyle Rudolph is not a long-term answer, but there's other needs on this team that are more important. This tight end group as a whole, just for 2021, no worse than a B. I mean, when you factor in Rudolph, Toilo, and Caden Smith, I actually think it's one of the strengths of this team, as crazy as that may sound, when you factor in the entire unit and you're not just looking at Evan Ingram, who is still a mismatch guy, and maybe with less pressure on him, being that he will not be the number 1 option anymore. He'll probably be the 3 or even 4 option for the New York Giants with Barkley and Golladay added to the team, with Shepard on the team as well. That may help him. And the addition of Rudolph as well. I actually like the overall unit. Not long-term, but short-term for 2021, I actually think it's a pretty solid positional group. Now we're going to go over to the defensive side of the ball, and of course that is the strength of this team. The defensive line specifically last year was the strongest unit for this team. They single-handedly won us the game against the Seattle Seahawks, them and the offensive line with the push up front. Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence, of course, are back. We signed Leonard Williams to the massive contract extension, coming off an 11.5 sack season. Now it's very hard to judge this line against, say a 4-3 line, because people are just going to look at sacks, because that's the sexy number to look at. But in this type of, alignment, the defensive line for the New York Giants, their goal is to get pressure on the interior and set up sack opportunities for blitzers, safeties, outside linebackers, so on and so forth. For the type of defense we run, this is one of the better defensive lines in football. And as an overall unit, I can't give them any worse than a B+. I think we have a very strong defensive line. I think Leonard Williams will be great. I think Dexter Lawrence will be just fine in year 3. He's only going to grow and get better. It'll be interesting to see whether or not they play him more on the inside now that Dalvin Tomlinson is gone. Of course, he was the key departure. How are you going to replace replace him. I think B.J. Hill will get more of an expanded role. Obviously, we gave Austin Johnson a raise. You expect to see him get more of a role. And Danny Shelton, I thought, was a really sound pickup by the Giants that should help in the run-stuffing department. In addition to that, they brought in a very nice under-the-radar signing on a one-year deal in Ifedi Adenabo. I think he's a guy that could play all over the line, whether it's in a 4-3 alignment on the outside. He could play a bit on the inside. Gettleman alluded to that. And he even has experience as an outside linebacker well at college. So as an overall unit, I'd say a B+, maybe even an A-. I think this is one of the strengths of this football team, and I would not suggest drafting one in the first round. It's why I've expressed I personally would not prefer Kwity Paye in the first round for the New York Giants because I think he's going to be more of a Leonard Williams type player. Had we not brought back Leonard Williams, I would have been on the Kwity Paye train. That's just me. Those are my personal opinions. But for next year and even the foreseeable future, because you figure Williams is definitely going to be here at least another year, Dexter Lawrence will be here at least 2 more years after this year. I don't think this is a positional group that needs a huge improvement. Now, am I against taking the defensive tackle in the 3rd, 4th round area? Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I've mocked defensive tackles in some of my mocks in that area. B.J. Hill very well might not be back next year. The same could be said for Austin Johnson. They only have 1-year commitments. Same could be said for Ifedi Adenabo. So if they really like an interior defensive lineman in the 3rd or the 4th round, I'm all about it. But in the first 2 rounds of this year's draft, I stay away. Next up, we've got the edge rusher / inside linebacker. Kind of combine the two, and big question marks on the edge. I'm not gonna paint a pretty picture, but this defense to me relies more, as you saw last year, on coverage and on scheme. Last year, even though we lacked any talent at the edge rusher position, especially after Jimenez and Carter went down, the Giants still, I think, were top 10 or 12 in sacks. They were top 5 or 6 in knockdowns, top 8 or 9, I think, in pressures. They still got pressure on the quarterback, and that was due to coverage. That was due to manipulation. That was due to the scheme. That was due to the strong interior defensive line. So even though this is definitely a major need for ours, we may not need to take one in the first round. I know people are talking about that, and I get it. And if it was a strong edge rusher class, I'm all aboard. I personally would still side away from doing it, but I would completely understand if the Giants would like to do that. If they do in the first round, I would prefer that they trade down. But you look at this group right now, Lorenzo Carter, major question mark, coming off an injury. I do think he fits the scheme very well. I think he was set to have a breakout season for the New York Giants last year before the injury. Unfortunately, he went down. Jimenez, major question mark there. I actually thought some Giants fans were kind of overrating him a little bit going into last year, and obviously the Giants didn't really love him. Wasn't getting a ton of snaps, if you remember correctly, even before the injury, but maybe he'll come back strong. Ryan Anderson, I thought, was a sound pickup by the Giants. I think he's a former 2nd-round pick from Washington, and maybe he provides a spark in situational, in certain situations. Carter Coughlin and Cam Brown, who knows, right? Late-round picks last year who showed glimpses of hope and maybe could grow into stronger players this year, but we definitely could use another talented player at that position. You could even argue that we don't even have a number 2 option right now, depending on how Carter and Jimenez look going into next season. I still like Carter, but I don't know what he's going to be off the injury. That is something where we definitely could use an upgrade. Now, you could argue maybe we go with a guy, like Micah Parsons, who could play on the inside, but is definitely a threat as a pass rusher as well. But the linebacker group as a whole definitely could use an upgrade. In the middle, of course, Blake Martinez was great for the Giants last year. Probably the best season we've had by a middle linebacker since Antonio Pierce. He was very good for the Giants last year. Proved to be a good signing. You still have 2 more years of him under contract. Reggie Ragland, I thought, was a solid guy to bring in. I think he'll be used in certain packages in obvious run situations. He's good against the run, liability, and pass coverage. Devontae Downs is back. Don't expect much out of him. And Tate Crowder actually performed pretty well for the Giants in his rookie year when given the opportunity. Could we use a coverage linebacker? Absolutely. I look at this unit, I think we could use a coverage linebacker, and I definitely think we could use an edge. As an overall unit, when you factor in the inside linebacker and the edge, I'll probably give it a C, maybe a C+, but we definitely need an upgrade at that edge rusher position. And in terms of the future, you don't have a lot of answers there. So I definitely think that's a spot where the Giants could elect to take somebody early in this year's draft, specifically at the edge rusher spot. In the secondary, probably the biggest strength of this defense, if not, it's the defensive line between the cornerbacks and the safeties. Last year, a major liability for the Giants was that cornerback 2 position. They went out there, they signed Adoree Jackson. You obviously expect him to be the starting corner opposite James Bradbury, who played at a near all-pro level. So between him and Bradbury, we're pretty strong at the corner spots. Isaac Yiadom will provide valuable depth. He played okay for the Giants, and I think he's definitely solid as a number 3 or 4 corner. Julian Love is a nice nice versatile piece that could play some safety if somebody goes down, could play some slot, could play maybe a little bit on the outside. He's a nice guy to have off the bench and put in sub packages. Sam Beal, who knows? He sat out last year, and up to this point in his career, he's been injury riddled, and when given the opportunity, didn't look too good on the field. Darnay Holmes, I think, could very well be the starting slot corner again this year, and didn't allow a touchdown last year. Definitely had some hiccups last year, which is what you'd expect from a rookie, a guy that was drafted in the 4th round, a guy that was learning a new position, played on the outside well at UCLA, but I think a lot of us have high hopes for him going into next year. And the safety group as a whole, Logan Ryan, Jabril Peppers, and Xavier McKinney. McKinney, who knows, right? He definitely struggled a little bit in the beginning when he got the opportunity off the injury, but looked strong against Dallas, closing out the season with the interception. But obviously, we have high hopes for him. I think he fits the scheme very well. Jabril Peppers looked terrific, especially during the second half of last season. And Logan Ryan was a very valuable contributor for the New York Giants last year. The safety unit as a whole, I don't think the New York Giants should draft the safety. Definitely not in the first 2 rounds. If you love a safety, maybe you start to think about it in the 3rd round if he's the best player on your board, because you could say Logan Ryan may not be is not a long-term answer, and maybe they don't plan to sign Jabril Peppers long-term. But I look at that safety group, it's definitely one of the strengths of this team. The safety group as a whole, I'm giving like an A-. I mean, I think it's really strong. And the cornerbacks, the 2 starting exterior corners, I think the same thing, like an A- as an overall secondary. I think it's terrific. I think it's definitely maybe the overall strength of this team. I think it's what's going to drive this defense. But obviously, there's some injury concerns, right? Peppers has been hurt before. Logan Ryan's not a spring chicken. Adoree Jackson has had injury problems. So maybe you want to get some depth in the draft. Maybe you want to think more long-term in the 3rd or 4th round area. I completely understand it with a cornerback or a safety. But early in the draft, I don't think it's a need. The obvious needs on this team right now are interior offensive line, a future wide receiver potentially opposite Kenny Golladay, and obviously the edge. I think those are the 3 biggest needs, and potentially a coverage linebacker. But I like the roster, and I think we'll make some improvements in the draft. We'll see how it all plays out. I'll analyze the roster after the draft and after we bring in some undrafted free agents. But kind of wanted to give you guys a glimpse of what I feel about this team as of now, headed into the draft. As always, guys, if you like what you watch, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.